Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for women's hockey, curling, the XFL, and what else are they talking about on Twitter? WrestleMania. Sure, WrestleMania. Welcome to the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs around the internet, including Cover 32 and Cold Omaha. He is Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing tonight?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I have had a 13-hour workday, and now we're gonna podcast. So if I was gonna take one of those like which Prince song quiz are you, I'd probably get Delirious at this point. I think it's gonna be Delirious is the answer I'm gonna end up pulling. I don't think it's gonna be Kiss. I don't think it's gonna be like Purple Rain. I'm thinking we're going straight to Delirious.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a great song at least. Let's just forgo anything involving football off season for a moment, and let's just talk about women's hockey and curling and men's curling because that's the United States seems to be good at that, and we can rub something in Eric's face.
At that, it turns out,
best in the world. Ha. Yes, let's talk about women's hockey. Something you know nothing about, but I've actually been to games. I've actually seen the Lamoureux twins in person. I'm such a hipster. I saw them at UND before they were cool.
Yeah, you saw them before they were cool. Okay, so women's hockey is like interesting to me because like I really enjoy watching it, but when I do watch it, it's like there's like a disconnect because I don't watch that much hockey at all, but I very much expect checking.
Yes.
And so there's so many moments in the game that we're watching that I just kind of get taken out of it because like that was such like. Why didn't you finish? Like that's so
it's like it's too polite a version of hockey for some people. Yeah,
it's like you're legally prevented from doing it. And the women hockey players that I know, mostly from high school and a little bit of college, they all want to be able to check because a lot of the best ones have played men's hockey. And they just want to play the game how it's meant to be played, and they can't. But it is really weird watching it. But I mean, obviously, the game itself that we ended up watching was just phenomenal. Oh my God.
Yep, they are the Lamoureux twins are the pride of a school that no longer has a women's hockey team. So kudos to them for bringing home the gold to inspire other people to not go to UND for women's hockey anymore.
It's sad, but at least the I guess the team is mostly Wisconsin Badgers, isn't it? There's like 9 Badgers on that team.
Yeah.
And like they're the top ranked women's college hockey program by like 8 miles. Like it's not even close. What number 2? Like Clarkson or something is number 2.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's a UND team first, obviously, and then a Badgers team. And then I guess there were a couple of Gophers there too.
Yeah. So, good for them and curling. And we might as well just cover the XFL since we're not going to cover football anymore since we're just waiting for that to come back. And we can talk about WrestleMania since that's all anyone wanted to talk about on Twitter on Sunday night. So
yeah, it just filled my feed, and I didn't like watch it, and so I'm just like, oh wow, it's interesting watching people react. Like this has to be how a lot of my followers see my tweets when I'm like tweeting about the Olympics or whatever, right? Like,
like Arif's going off on a politics thing, and they're just like, oh God, please, can I mute him for a moment?
Right?
I'll follow him again when he starts making sense.
Watching like the drama of WrestleMania play out, and everyone's like referring to a shared knowledge, not just of what's happening on screen, but the history of the drama behind it. And I'm like, yeah, I can't believe Daniel Bryan didn't do that. Like, I have no idea what's happening. He's the yes guy, right?
Like look out for Arif and Don from Ohio's wrestling podcast called Count It Out with Arif and Don. So that'll be out later this year.
Yeah, it's going to be one episode.
It'll be one episode with Arif just like going, nope, I'm rage quitting. I'm out of this. This is too much. So welcome to the off season. Welcome to
talk about the curling.
Oh, we can talk about the curling, I suppose. Men's curling. I actually know a fair amount of men's curlers. There's actually a big tournament in Grand Forks out at one of the bars.
At the bar.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So the bar is obviously inside, but when you go into the parking lot, they actually ice out a good section of the parking lot, so they have like a curling tournament every year outdoors.
That's cool.
And you're allowed to bring your drink outside, and you watch the curling, and you watch the curlers get progressively more drunk and have problems with the whole like.
They're on ice thing.
Yeah.
It's so clear that this was a game invented by the Scots and perfected by the Canadians. Like there's no, you just watch it and you're like, yeah, no, those two things definitely make sense.
Yeah, it completely made sense. Just like how you look at hockey and it's like, okay, these were people who clearly wanted to play soccer, but they had ice instead of like grass.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I was listening to. I ended up tweeting the story out, so skip ahead if you've already seen that tweet. But I was listening to NPR and here in Minnesota, there's like an hour or two at night when they play like Canadian broadcasting or something, and so we got their reactions to curling. This is before the gold medal game, but the United States had already knocked them out. And they were talking about like how curling was just way different in the 70s, not like a nostalgic, like it was better back then, but just like how weirdly different it was. And so
it would be odd to see someone not smoking a cigar while brushing the drum.
Yeah. Everyone was smoking cigars all the time. And there was this one.
That's like a beer league thing. Like you make it to first, you chug a beer. You make it to second, you chug a beer.
Exactly. And I guess like this guy who's in like the Canadian Curling Hall of Fame. He's like one of the best Canadian curlers in history, which I guess that's what that implies. He was just playing at a club against another team. Like they were competitive nationally, but it's not like they were going to be an Olympic team or anything. And he called for hamburgers just in the middle of the game. And the club, like they accommodated him. They're like, yeah, okay, if you want hamburgers, we'll get you hamburgers. And so he ends up, he's eating a hamburger on the ice. And he throws his stone and he's calling for his sweepers, and they're not there because they're eating hamburgers at the bar, getting drunk. And he's not reacting as if they're not there. He's just calling it the entire time as if they're actually sweeping. He's clearly drunk, and he's got a cigar in his mouth and a hamburger in his hand, and he kicked their asses by himself. It's just the most amazing thing. And then that story gets told, like the story was told from the perspective of the guy whose ass got kicked. He's like, oh yeah, we didn't stand a chance, like in his like Canadian accent. And then someone called in and were like, yeah, everyone, smokes cigars all the time. My mom, loves stogies. And I found out that her favorite sweeping broom was a favorite because there was a flask inside of it. It's just like, what?
How? Why is anything a thing at this point?
So good.
That is astonishing. That I'm just trying to imagine picking up the broom to get a taste.
Right? Like, I have no idea how that even works. How much could it possibly store? How do you use it? Does it detach from the broom? Does that affect your ability to like?
Because it clearly isn't regulation. Because if you're going to be brushing, it's like having a corked bat in baseball. You're getting an unfair competitive advantage. They're going to X-ray the broom beforehand before the match to make sure. It's kind of the equivalent of the guy who wears the T-shirt that says "I hate doping" and then ends up, getting charged for doping.
Right. Yeah. But the American story for curling is kind of fascinating. Do you know anything about this John Schuster guy?
No.
So
wait, was he the one who was left off the team 4 years ago?
Sort of. He left. Because
it was mutual. He had a Mark Sanchez eating a hot dog on the sideline situation, not unlike the Canadian thing.
Right. So I don't think he's the guy that was like left. Like, so so the whole thing is, because I think he was bronze, 2 Olympics ago or whatever. This is like his 4th or 5th Olympics, but like, so he's been on either as the skip or as one of the other players. I think lead. He's been on like every U.S. men's curling team, and he has been known as this spectacular choke artist. And so in like national events, they would always win, and he would be an important figure in their winning. And evidently, U.S. curling just got really fed up with him specifically choking at the Olympics. And so they created an event or something where they invited all of the top curlers in the United States to try and form the super team to try and take him out. And he got, not so upset, but he like took this chip on his shoulder and he's like, well, yeah, fuck you guys. I'm going to take everybody you didn't invite and make that the team. And that's the team that won the gold this year at the Olympics. This all reject team of people.
Ragtag group of, yeah.
There's this really good story at The Ringer that goes into his like redemption arc. It's really good. I'll link it in the show notes. But like, this is this dude who keeps on like winning these national titles, the right to represent the United States in the Olympics, and then just like choking it. And people hate it. People in the curling community have called it shoestering. Like he's basically Tony Romo. And the fact that he won a gold, I think is super cool. And the fact that he did it with Matt Hamilton, this, this Packers fan from Wisconsin with like the ugliest mustache on the planet, just amazing.
Just unfortunate facial hair for him. Just totally unfortunate.
Yeah. I mean, he embraces it, but yeah.
Well, yeah. Like that can take you a little bit, but it's still terrible. Like you tried your best and it's still awful. So all that aside, I think we have some football stuff to talk about. We got a couple things to talk about. We apparently are just doing spring cleaning on our quarterbacks. We've got the combine to talk about. We got the mailbag. But before we do any of that, just want to thank you guys so much for your support over the last several years. I'm including several now because it feels several because it's, the end of a 13-hour day. Thank you guys so much for helping out with Norse Code. We are ad-free. We like being ad-free. If you would like to have us continue to be ad-free, you can support us one of two different ways. You can go to paypal.me/Norse Code, and you can donate there. You can send off Tree Fitty and help keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay. Although the Loch Ness Monster is at my place now, so it's a little weird. We'll talk about him in a sec. You can also go to patreon.com/Norse Code and donate there. That's more of a monthly subscription, so you can donate anywhere between $1 and untold amounts of money and help us out there. So, Norse Code Nessie found his way to my place now. You've met Nessie, I believe.
Yeah, I met him in London.
Yeah, you met him in London. He was sent over to Dusty. Dusty sent me a very nice care package with a few things, including Nessie. So Nessie has made it to the frozen tundra, and I'll be bringing him to Minneapolis the next time I make it through to bring him down to the stadium. He is on Instagram if you'd like to follow. I believe it's at Norse Code Nessie. I can't remember if it's a private account or not. You do have to follow it in order to see the picture on it, but... Norse Code Nessie was something that I believe John Mainland had put together for over in the UK and actually brought him out of Loch Ness, and then he did a few things over in London for the London game, including tailgating and attending. So that was kind of cool. So that is at Norse Code Nessie on Instagram. So that was kind of cool. So let's get into the show. And well, quarterbacks are apparently all the rage of this offseason, as we've seen with Jimmy Garoppolo and the fact that Aaron Rodgers is now in discussions for a contract extension because
what's he going to get, like $40 million a year?
It's almost absurd. And they're all the rage this offseason and apparently worth fighting for with Albert Breer. How's that work going out for you?
I characterize it to you as a fight. It's more of a spat.
I read the tweet and I just assumed that he had a situation with autocorrect there.
Right. Okay. So Breer tweets out that the Jaguars can get out of Bortles' contract in 2019 for only $6.5 million because. $6.5 million is what's guaranteed for the second year of his contract. And I tweeted out, well, that's not like quite an accurate assessment of their decision making because a lot of his guaranteed comes in signing bonus. He doesn't have all of his guaranteed locked up in the first year guarantee because his cap hit's only $10 million. So he's got a $5 million base salary for his first year. And then he has a $15 million signing bonus spread out over 3 years. And so that's $5 million of cap hit every year. So his first year cap hit's only $10 million. So his second year cap hit is $16.5 million. And if you cut him, the cap accelerates. So all of the stuff that's guaranteed for future years ends up becoming your dead cap hit the year that you cut a player. That happens for everybody. So if you've got guarantees for a player extended out into future years, those guarantees in the future years end up counting against your cap that year. And so that's why the dead cap hurts so much if you cut a player early on, if they have a good deal. And so the dead cap hit for Bortles is $16.5 million. If they cut him in year two. And so I tweeted that out. I was like, no, his actual dead cap hit, his dead cap liability is $16.5 million. So that's not really accurate. They can't just bail on him for $6.5 million. And he goes, I was just talking about cash flow, chief. Okay. First, weird that you called me chief.
See, that's where I thought it was an autocorrect situation. Like he just has an iPhone that he, hasn't yelled at Arif into enough.
Yeah, right. Most people who autocorrect against me call me arid. So, that's a new and exciting difference.
What a fun and sexy time for you.
Yeah. But that was so weird. And it's like, who gives a crap about cash flow? Like, are we worried about whether or not Shoaib Khan is going to run out of money?
Why aren't you concerned about that? I feel like that's a conversation that Marxist Panther would be bringing up on as an aside.
Right. Why wouldn't you be concerned about that?
We must reclaim the methods of production.
But I mean, Khan's fine. They just took the tarps off for this year. They increased the prices of ticket sales. I think they'll be able to pay the $6.5 million that they owe Blake Bortles. Who cares about cash flow? Why would you report on that? So yeah, that was
because it's the off season, and that's what we're reduced to at this point.
No, that's not the reason is because he didn't know how to handle the information he received and tweeted out the wrong thing, and he didn't want to backpedal.
Oh, okay, Chief, I gotcha. So apparently everyone has an insider with the Vikings nowadays. That's fun. There are competing reports, and it's almost impossible to be on Vikings Twitter at this point and not see contradictory reports all day, every day, as far as what the Vikings are going to be doing. But we do have to take a moment and kind of analyze the very real possibility that the Vikings are going to end up going for Kirk Cousins. Now, this is before Washington decides to do something stupid and franchise him before trying to get a trade for him. So that, with that kind of in mind, what are we hearing about Cousins to Minnesota being a real thing?
So there's a good tweet that Chris Wessling put out that, it's mostly just an aggregation of all the NFL.com reporters' tweets, but all three of them say that, early on, so most of the teams are already at the combine, and that's when, more substantial rumors about free agency hit, because people always do the under the table negotiating for free agents at the combine. That's when tampering occurs. And so early indications are that the Vikings are engaging in some heavy tampering, essentially, with the reporting. So Ian Rappaport and Gil Brandt, of all people, who doesn't really break news, but sure, and Mike Garofalo have all reported that the Vikings are very in on Kirk Cousins, and that the two of them have strong mutual interest. And I think that's a big difference from what we saw earlier, where all we saw earlier was interest from Cousins to the Vikings. That's what Paul Allen reported on KFan. That's what Benjamin Albright reported on Twitter. But this is the first time we've seen, I think, at least as far as I can tell, that the Vikings are also very, very interested in Cousins. And the Vikings' interest in Cousins could, be pretty significant. It really depends on. So a lot of people are tweeting. So Andy Carlson tweeted this out. I've seen a lot of comments to this effect, that the only people who would know or who have this kind of information that they want to get out are agents. And so the agents might be trying to prime Kirk Cousins' market. And that could be true. I don't think that's really the case here. I think that a lot of the time what you hear at the combine, there's a lot of agents at the combine, but a lot of the time what you hear at the combine in terms of free agency rumors, they tend to kind of bear out in some respect. Like, I mean, that's where I think we first heard that the Vikings were in on Clint Bowling. Obviously, they didn't sign him. They were kind of vaguely interested, for example, in Raheem Moore. I learned that from combine rumors and stuff like that. Obviously, they didn't sign him either, but that's where you kind of hear the beginning of a lot of these free agency rumors. I don't think it's just agents trying to prime up their own guy. But yeah, a lot of people are like, well, you only tell someone something if you get something out of it. That's not really true. We have to remember that these teams aren't monolithic organizations. They're composed of people who have friends. And even then, sometimes they exchange information. So I tell you something, and what I get out of it is not that you tell everybody this thing, but that you will tell me something that'll help me out later down the road. That's kind of how Adam Schefter operates. And so I think a lot of people are just kind of reading into this, saying that this is kind of falsy, that this is all just coming from the agent's end and that the Vikings actually aren't interested. I don't think that's the case. I think the Vikings are genuinely interested, which raises a lot of questions. How interested are they? Because that determines how much money that, Cousins will be able to command on the market, and that, impacts the Vikings kind of long-term defensively, what they can do. How interested are they? Because, that might mean that they're not that interested in, Teddy, which we'll talk about in a second. But yeah, Cousins to the Vikings is, I think, becoming a much stronger possibility, and something that I'm much more strongly considering now as a possibility than before. Because before, I thought the Vikings were one of many teams, and the Vikings may be interested, but I wouldn't be surprised if they got, outbid. They very often get outbid on the top free agents in the market. Ricky Wagner, I think, is a good example of that from this last year, but it's happened in a couple of years. And they got outbid by on Alshon Jeffrey, for example. But I don't know. Denver is definitely very interested. Are they going to pay more? I think they've got less cap room than the Vikings. I have to double check that. But it's something that I consider the Vikings were in on, but I didn't think that the Vikings were necessarily the most likely. Now it seems at this point that the Vikings might in fact be the most likely landing spot for Cousins. Although Vegas didn't think so a couple of days ago, which I find interesting too.
I do find it odd that Denver isn't making more noise in the way of making a push for him. I feel like Denver seemed like the more logical choice.
Maybe. I don't logical kind of, it really depends on what that means. I mean, Denver obviously has a team around them. They've got a great defense still, although that's, it's not as strong as it was. And they've got, some receivers that they got Demaryius Thomas, right? But I don't know.
Considering that division seems a little bit weaker than it used to be,
right?
And the fact that they did fairly well, considering they had a guy who was throwing much like Jared Allen was on that Monday Night Football sketch, under center and quarterback, It seemed like the sort of place that
it really felt like a natural fit.
I think. Yeah. Right. Personality-wise, personnel-wise, anyway.
Right. But yeah, now it just seems like Cousins might be super interested in the Vikings. One of the things that kind of bothers me is that there are competing reports on what Cousins wants. Cousins wants as much money as possible. Oh, maybe he'll go to Jacksonville, which, maybe now that's not going to be the case. Because of that insane Bortles extension, which is only a product of the fact that they gave him a 5th-year option in the first place. But,
the people love the Bortles down there. Duval is all in on Bortles, apparently.
Yeah, sure.
They're all about the cash flow.
They're all about the cash flow. But yeah, he seeks as much money as possible, and other people are like, no, he got a bunch of money in Washington off the franchise tags. What he wants is security, and so he wants guaranteed money over the course of many years. Which maybe, probably not, or maybe that's something that I thought was true for a while. He wants to go, where he can win. Which everyone kind of does. What really matters is the extent to which they want to. And it's just all of these things are true, right? It's just, it's how true they are compared to each other that matters. And no one's really making strong arguments or making strong reports as to like what that is. Like if the Browns pay him, and if someone pointed this out, the Browns could actually pay him. Was it a 5-year, $200 million contract, which would be hilarious. They could do that because of how much an insane amount of cap room that they have and how few cap liabilities they have. If the Browns offer him a 5-year, $200 million contract with a good amount guaranteed, I think he suddenly doesn't care about winning.
I think at that point he's like, well, I'm going to own the team if I resign.
Right, exactly. You can, with that amount of money, you can start putting together an ownership group and become a minority owning, shareholder of, I don't know, the Panthers. Like, come on, it's so weird.
There are options. We covered that last episode. Yeah. This is your way of buying. This is your way of buying into ownership.
Right. Or, if the Patriots offer him like, $23 million a year for like 5 years, I think suddenly he'll stop caring about the total amount of money, right? Like, yeah, you can win at the Patriots and be, so it really like depends on to what extent those things are true. And if he thinks he can win more in Minnesota, but get more money in Denver, I don't think it's very clear cut, which one he would end up choosing. So that's interesting. I think that the idea that, the Vikings are number one is, it could be true preliminarily. Like it could be, he thinks the Vikings are his best fit, but I think that he's very open about, changing his mind on what that means. Like I think, for example, when Peyton Manning was visiting, the Broncos and the 49ers and like maybe visiting the Dolphins, I don't remember. There was a lot of indication that Manning initially preferred the 49ers, but wouldn't have had as much control over the offense with Harbaugh there. And so ended up choosing the Broncos. And minds can change, right? So, yeah, it's difficult to read into the what he wants sort of thing. I think all we can say are preliminarily, there's a good chance that Cousins wants to be on the Vikings. Preliminarily, there's a really good chance that the Vikings want Kirk Cousins, but the amount that they're willing to pay might not be enough to override his other concerns. So we should be preparing for a world where Kirk Cousins could be a Viking.
So we had a mailbag question come in, and it kind of touches a bit on this. So I just wanted to bring it up. It's from Miles Swami, who is basically asking. There's two versions of Rick Spielman. There is the plan for the future, and there's the we have a very short window. We have to do everything we can right now to win. Sort of thing. And that was very evident in what's happened recently as far as planning ahead. And what we saw in 2010, the second year of Favre, with let's just get everything as close together. This window is shrinking. We have to be able to compete. He's going to come back and be as good as he was, like that sort of thing. Would this be more of a situation of we need to win this now? This isn't something like we can build into something really positive. This is just one of those like we're throwing everything we can at this.
He really does seem like a guy who only tries to hit singles or homers.
Yeah. there is no in-between on that.
Yeah. Like the closest in-between may have been like the Captain Munderland signing. Like that's the closest. But like
a bit of middling there, yeah.
Right, yeah. But like otherwise it's like, yeah, we'll trade a first and a fourth for Sam Bradford. Like, oh, okay. Or, we're going to go down to Mississippi and sign Favre twice. Or we're not going to sign any big free agents. Tom Johnson, Linval Joseph, who, I loved that signing at the time, but like the Tom Johnson signing, I had no idea. I thought he was going to get cut in camp. But Linval, I liked that signing at the time, and he was probably the top nose tackle on the market, but he made like $6 million a year. It clearly wasn't a splash signing. You got to handle this offensive line. Oh, I signed like 3 guards you've never heard of, and I drafted another one in the 5th round. Or it's like, all right, we're going to pay like Alex Boone $8 million or whatever.
Look, yeah, Alex Boone, $8 million. Anybody got a problem with that?
Right. And like
crickets. Really?
Right. Yeah, right. And then like, I guess the other closest thing is like Charlie Johnson, but not really. Like, I don't, or not Charlie Johnson, you might consider as a middle of the road signing. I don't think it was. I think he was meant to be kind of a backup signing that ended up being forced to play tackle because of the sudden cutting of Bryant McKinney. Like I think that was like one of those quiet signings that turned into a double, right? Like by error. So yeah, he really does hit a lot of singles or homers. That's kind of interesting. I hadn't considered that. And he does that in the draft too. He's like, I got to have 10 draft picks. I'm willing to trade back in the first to do it. We're going to have 6 fifth rounders or whatever. Or we're going to trade half our assets for Cordero Patterson. Okay.
Yep, sure. Why not? What? Percy Harvin's available.
Right? Or exactly. It's like, I guess this is why you never have any 4th round picks. Weird.
Yeah, no one at the gym is trying to convince him, or do the people at the gym are convincing him go big or go home. So I mean, right.
So this would be the trade a 1st and a 4th for Sam Bradford version of Spielman instead of the we signed Matt Castle version of Rick Spielman.
Yeah. The next thing we should bring up is the reports that have come out that Teddy will likely not have his contract be told by the Vikings. The first thing I want to ask are people blinded by his personality and our desire to have him return to the field, regardless of his skill level? Is that more of the reason why people are upset about the potential for him to no longer be a Viking?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it'd be impossible not to say, that his personality was a big part of, and just the story of returning.
Just too darn likable.
Right. But I will say there's a lot in his 2015 stuff that is really likable in terms of just his on-field play. It's just we have no idea, if he can do that anymore. So, I think there's a big part of it that is, people are blinded by, his charisma and his likability and stuff like that. But I think that there's also the genuine question of how much better is Kirk Cousins than, 2015 Teddy Bridgewater really? Obviously Cousins had, significantly better numbers in his particular offense. But, is that meaningful to the extent that, Teddy is younger and he had the worst offensive line that Pro Football Focus, I think, has data for going all the way back to 2006, that kind of stuff. Right. And so, it's, I think that's part of it. I think also I think those headlines have been crafted poorly too. Because you characterized it correctly. The Vikings are not, or the NFL Management Council has ruled that they're not going to toll Teddy Bridgewater's contract. That's it. But all the headlines are Teddy Bridgewater's going to hit free agency, which kind of implies that the Vikings aren't trying. They're going to let him walk is the way those headlines sound, right? And that's not what they're reporting. Now it is a little bit concerning that, the Vikings have apparently not attempted to sign a long-term contract with Bridgewater, but I think they were waiting until they heard about what happened with the tolling situation, because I think that you can, toll Bridgewater's contract and, maybe probably not sign Kirk Cousins, but, sign another quarterback, sign Case Keenum. Both have on essentially 1-year deals with easy outs in their second year. Teddy would literally be on a 1-year deal, and, Keenum, you might have a low amount of guaranteed or something like that. And in that case, then you've got, your ability to work things out. But, with now this news about the fact that he can't be told, they might start up a genuine round of negotiations. They've got until, March 14th, they've got, 2.5 weeks. So they might hammer out something really quick because they know Teddy doesn't have much of a market if he walks. Who knows? But I don't think that this is a signal that the Vikings are done with him or anything. This is literally just a ruling from the NFL Management Council about the rules of the contract. They lost the A.J. McCarron case. I don't think they wanted to lose another one because I think the contract language favors the NFLPA, which is an argument that we made on this podcast back in September, that the NFLPA is probably correct about this language. And a lot of people thought that his contract would automatically toll him that the NFLPA was being weird. So, another score for us. We tend to record our hits and not our misses, but whatever. Another score for us.
Well, no one wants to bring up their misses.
Right. But yeah, I don't think that that's meaningful in terms of what the Vikings think about Teddy. I think it's only an indication of what their options are. They might even, place, the exclusive rights free agent tag, which is a relatively cheap tag that would require a team give up compensation in order to sign him. Maybe not. There's a couple of options, but I think there's no indication from this news that it means anything about whether or not the Vikings want to keep Teddy. They just have, the easiest and cheapest option off the table now.
And apparently his feelings are hurt. So there's that.
Yeah, Mike Garofalo reported on NFL Network that Teddy Bridgewater told teammates that he was hurt by the Vikings' lack of respect. And I think that this is a story. It's one of those stories where there are definitely strands of truth that have been constructed to create a narrative that's not that true. And if you watch the video, which I know you couldn't because I guess on your browser it requires Flash to play the video.
And I just wasn't going to do it on my phone, apparently, no.
Yeah, right. But yeah, we'll link the video in the show notes. But, Garofalo reports that, Teddy feels kind of hurt by the lack of respect. He told a couple of teammates this or whatever. And then Garofalo speculated, this part is not his report, but he speculated that the Vikings not tolling him was part of it because it means they don't want to keep him, which is dumb for a couple of reasons. The first is that Bridgewater definitely would have assembled, a couple of lawyers to go along with the NFLPA to fight the contract being told. It's bad for him. He would not feel disrespected by that. That's dumb. It's bad for Bridgewater for the contract to be told. Second, the Vikings don't make that decision. The NFL Management Council does. That's just weird. Like, what a weird thing to be upset about. But yeah, I would say what likely happened was Bridgewater probably said, that stings or something like that to a couple of the teammates that he's friends with. He's like really good friends with Anthony Barr. They're in the same draft class. I'm pretty sure he's pretty good friends with like Eric Kendricks and obviously a lot of the receivers. He's pretty good friends with Stephon Diggs. So I wouldn't be surprised if he told one of them that he's kind of stung by the fact that he was the third quarterback for both the playoff games.
This is all problems being like that are all like being stirred in a big pot by Laquan Treadwell. Let's just be honest here.
To the press.
Yeah, let's just be honest here. This is Treadwell being Treadwell. It's another reason we need to trade him to the Giants.
Let's Shermer deal with him again. No, but I wouldn't be surprised to be like mentioned. Yeah, I'm stung by this, but then that turning into this overall feeling of disrespect that maybe isn't there. So I don't read too much into it. And I think that can all wash away if the Vikings give him a good offer. Like if the Vikings provide him a generous offer or generous enough offer, like that's the best form of respect you can show. Like we think you're important and we're willing to like pay for it and, like use our limited cap resources to keep you. Like it all goes away once they come to the negotiating table. It all doesn't matter. If they lowball him, he'll be disrespected either way. And so whether or not there was a previous form of disrespect, I think probably doesn't matter. If they lowball him and he thinks he can leave and get a better contract, then that's what he'll do. So I think that story is not that relevant.
No. What if we lowball him because we're concerned about our cash flow?
The Wilf's running out of money. They're going to have to racketeer in New Jersey again, I guess.
Exactly. Like this is going to be a whole new set of problems. And finally, Ian Rappaport is convinced that we are now saying goodbye to Keenum. I like in all of these stories that have come out really in the past 2 weeks, Bradford is just the one that everyone goes, oh yeah, he's like...
He's gone.
Yeah, he packed up his stuff like the day of the NFC Championship game. Like he landed, right. He got a big box, he brought it out to his car. Like we're just never going to see him in Minnesota again.
Right? Yeah. How hilarious would that be if oh yeah, the Vikings have agreed to a deal with Bradford. 1 year, $10 million, not that big, but like Oh yeah, he's still around. Yeah, okay,
and Kirk Cousins is considered his backup, and like, wait, what the hell? Like, and AJ McCarron's third, and Slaughter gets released, and Don from Ohio just like loses every bit of his like sanity.
Yeah, the only way that Don would be able to hold on to his fleeting sanity is if they like somehow signed Connor Shaw or something.
There we go. Yeah, we're gonna end up starting Bradford with AJ McCarron backing up, and in the third spot we're gonna put Kirk Cousins for like $25 million.
Right.
We got a lot of faith in Bradford. We spent a lot of first round picks on him.
I think Rappaport reported both that the Vikings were not going to use the franchise tag, and I think also separately that they would let him walk. I think that that's a separate report. So it's a little bit different than the reporting on the Teddy Bridgewater situation, where there was nobody positively reporting that they were going to let Bridgewater go. I think Rappaport positively or affirmatively reported that they were going to let Kirk Cousins hit the free agency market. So that is interesting and also actually unsurprising to me. Not that anyone who listens to this podcast needs a reminder, but I've felt, obviously I've personally felt that Keenum's success was not sustainable, but more importantly, in terms of the long-term direction of the team, I've indicated that I think that the team feels that way too, based off of a lot of the things that Mike Zimmer has said about Keenum's play, like. He had born with a horseshoe around his neck or something like that. Like that's like clearly not an indication that you think that this person is winning on skill alone. So it's not hugely surprising that they're letting him hit the market, but I've mentioned before that I would not necessarily hate signing Keenum and keeping say Bridgewater or whatever, signing Keenum for $17 million, which according to Over the Cap is actually might be what his market actually is. It might not be, $20 million like a lot of people think. And so that, that wouldn't bother me that much. But they're letting him hit free agency. The franchise tag is like, what, 25 million? I don't know. The franchise tag money is weird to me because the two people that they've talked about in terms of franchise tags was Sam Bradford and Kirk Cousins. And both of them have unique circumstances that would escalate their franchise tag to just absurd levels, right? Like Kirk Cousins' franchise tag would be like some 36 million or something like that because of the 144% rule. And Sam Bradford's franchise tag would be like 28 million because he's one of the few quarterbacks who would lose money on a traditional franchise tag. And so he has to get 120% of his previous contract. And so I actually have no idea what the current franchise tag for a non-franchised quarterback is, but I don't know, 24 million. That would, it sounds like the Vikings don't want to invest that much cap in Keenum. And if they don't want to invest that much cap in Keenum, it is curious that they're that into Kirk Cousins. I have been so I'm not a huge fan of signing Cousins, especially for $30 million, but like, I've just been a little bit reticent to tell the Vikings that they're wrong on quarterbacks after they've been right so many times in a row. Like, yeah, okay. Like,
at some point, they actually earned the benefit of the doubt, which is not something you would have expected for the Vikings and quarterbacks.
Yeah, right. It's been a while. But yeah, it's like, I can't believe that you didn't draft Teddy Bridgewater at 9. Oh, they ended up getting him. Man, he turned out pretty good. I can't believe you traded for Sam Bradford. Oh, wow. He turned out to be a friggin' Pro Bowler. Wow. Okay. Oh, crap. They have to start Keenum. Yeah, it turned out all right.
No, son of a. Oh, okay.
Yeah. They get some confidence from me for this. So, if I was going to make the decision, I would say don't sign Kirk Cousins. If they make the decision to sign Kirk Cousins, I'll wait. I'll be like, yeah, I wouldn't have done that, but I don't know. You get some latitude now. It's not like you just drafted Ponder and now signed Kirk Cousins. Like there's a bunch of good stuff in between.
Yeah. Like we're going to draft Ponder. Also, how does everybody feel about Donovan McNabb? Like,
right.
What?
He made the Pro Bowl a couple of times, right?
He made it to the Super Bowl once, and
so
four NFC Championship games. Like, oh yeah,
39 passing yards. Let's go.
God. So yeah, we're having a nice big spring cleaning situation, and just trying to get all of our quarterbacks off of our roster, save for Sloter, apparently, and yeah. Also in league news, we have the Combine to look forward to. We have a bunch of mailbag questions about the Combine, but is there anything that kind of stands out to you this year about any of the participants or any of the news that's coming out?
Yeah, sure. So first, I want to kind of reiterate what we talk about every year at the Combine. Like, what really matters, and are the Underwear Olympics like fake? Like, should we get rid of the Combine because we don't actually learn anything about these? That sort of stuff, right? And so a bunch of times people will say the thing that matters the most at the Combine is the medicals. And for a lot of players, that's true. They've got medical questions. But for a lot of players, that's not true. They didn't have medical questions. They go to the medical. They don't have outstanding medical concerns, whatever, right? And so the medical could not possibly have been the most important. But, people say it's the medicals is the most important, or they'll say, it's actually the interview is the most important. And obviously that matters, but it's a 15-minute interview. They find out a ton about players from their scouts who talk to teammates, coaches, janitors, lunch ladies, bartenders. They learn a lot about players that, an interview is not going to be useful for. And so, the interview matters, obviously, but, maybe and a lot of times, the Vikings, I think they did not interview Harrison Smith or Eric Kendricks at the combine or bring them in because they were just such, clean whistles in terms of character. There's no reason to talk to them and even potentially tip their hand. So, the interviews matter, especially for, say someone like Baker Mayfield. But, most people will have made up their mind at Baker Mayfield before the interview. And so he basically just has to not tank it for the teams that like him to continue liking him. So they'll say that, right? They'll say those things matter. Or the under the table deals are the most important thing at the combine, which I guess, but I think without them, you'd still have free agency. So actually that doesn't matter at all. It just kickstarts free agency before it officially starts. Who cares? The workouts matter. And then some people will say, well, actually only the positional drills matter because, that tells you how good of a linebacker they'll be. And it's well, I mean, again, I don't disagree that they matter, but the ones where we get the numbers, those drills, they still matter. There's a lot of good evidence that tells us that athleticism matters, that athleticism as measured by combine metrics correlates really highly with NFL performance, that players tend to be underdrafted based off of their athleticism, and that players who are drafted in the mid rounds that are more athletic tend to outperform marginally, but not significantly, outperform their peers. If you look at all first round players, I mean, they all tend to be relatively athletic, but the more athletic ones tend to do better. And so those measurables do matter. It does matter kind of which ones you're looking at. And different people have come up with different studies. So the Harvard Sports Analysis Collective, for example, has found very few workouts matter for a bunch of positions. I found, something different based off of, my work, which deals a lot with filters. For example, if you run, say, for example, a flying 20, which is the last half of the 40-yard dash, how fast that flying 20 is. If you run, faster than a certain speed, that's a good indication that you'll do well at, a certain position. For the Vikings, they think that matters for wide receiver and cornerback. So let's say that matters for wide receiver and cornerback. But how much faster you do it, it doesn't necessarily scale. And so it's not as if, these workouts don't matter. It's just they don't always have to be perfectly linear. There's a lot of evidence that, a lot of these workouts matter. Measurements of explosion matter for, offensive linemen. Measurements of quickness, matter for defensive linemen. Explosion and speed kind of matter to safeties. What's interesting is I found the 40-yard dash kind of doesn't correlate at all for safeties, but the 20-yard split does. And it's weird because a lot of safeties have a lot of variance in their flying 20, in their last half of their 20. Some safeties just kind of tail off. Like Jaron Kearse is a good example. He ran a 4.65 40, but he actually ran a really fast split 20 or 20-yard split. And he just had a really slow second half of his 40. The flying 20 matter, or not the flying 20, the 20-yard split matters a lot for safeties. These things show up on the field. And so athletic testing does matter. They do end up producing, generally speaking, better athletes. That's not to say, unathletic players, are bad, right? Vontaze Burfict has done pretty well, although I would say he probably was lazy during the run up to the combine. And so it didn't necessarily test his true athleticism or anything like that. But there's a bunch of unathletic players who have done well. But there are more athletic players who have done better. So, I do think the combine matters. As for this year, I haven't done a ton of look into players that might pop out. So I, in preparation for this episode, have stolen players from other people's articles.
Yay!
I'll link them in the show notes. But players that are probably interesting to look at. So I think that the Vikings in the third or fourth round are probably going to try and see if they can, especially if they trade down and get a 4th round pick, are going to try and see if they can get an edge rusher who's like really athletic. They really prioritize athletic edge rushers. All the edge rushers that they've brought into the organization, that they've committed serious resources to. So basically everyone who's not an undrafted free agent has either had a really fast 3-cone or really good explosion numbers, especially broad jump. And very often both. So Everson Griffin, both. Brian Robinson, both. Danielle Hunter, both. And so there's a bunch of defensive ends that could hit one or both of those metrics for the Vikings. So Contavious Street from North Carolina State is probably the one that people have heard about the least. That would be interesting to see how he does. Otherwise, Kamoko Toure from Rutgers, who had a really good Senior Bowl showing. He was injured, his second and third year of college. He was a freshman All-American, then fell off the map, and then kind of had a decent year, and then blew up kind of at the Senior Bowl. So if he tests really well, that could be a target for the Vikings. And then, in the first round, people are going to be watching for like Marcus Davenport. So that's kind of interesting. At cornerback, the Vikings are maybe interested in a slot guy. They prioritize speed at cornerback a lot, but the slot, it's a little bit different. They've gotten kind of slower cornerbacks in the slot that have done better in quickness than in speed, but still it'll be good to watch, what Dante Jackson from LSU does. He has a plan to try and beat, the combine record for the 40-yard dash. I don't know if he'll be able to do it, but that's a thing that he thinks about. Denzel Ward's going to be a first-round corner, so it's unlikely that the Vikings will target him, but he's from Ohio State, and he's a good slot target for the Vikings. They're unlikely to want to put him on the outside because of his height, but I'm sure a lot of teams do want to put him on the outside because he was really good there. At linebacker, all the first round guys are supposed to be, really athletic. Who knew? So Roquan Smith's supposed to do well, but Tremaine Edmonds and Leighton Vander Esch from, I think it's Virginia Tech and Boise State respectively, are supposed to be, freaks. Edmonds has been compared to Anthony Barr. I doubt he'll do nearly as well as Barr did at his pro day when he ran a 4.41 at 255 pounds. But I imagine that, Tremaine Edmonds is going to run well. Leighton Vander Esch is an interesting linebacker because from what I've heard from people who I trust to make linebacker evaluations, he's not necessarily as instinctive of a linebacker as you want. And so he's not really good at a lot of linebacker skills like coverage and run defense, but he's really good at blitzing. So those are people to maybe look out for. On the offensive line, Chukwuma Okorafor from Western Michigan, another Western Michigan guy. The Vikings got, Willie Beavers, which did not work out. Someone else got Taylor Moton, which the Panthers did. They haven't played him yet, but I imagine that's going to work out. Evidently, the most athletic out of all of them might be this Okorafor guy, who could maybe slip inside to guard. Same thing with Martinez Rankin, who I think is related to Sheldon Rankin. No, he's not. But either way, he's supposed to be really athletic. I find him kind of interesting because his PFF numbers are really bad. And a lot of people are talking about him as a first-round pick. And so I imagine he just must have athleticism through the roof. So he's someone to watch.
He's got some of those intangibles that people like to talk about.
Yeah, an offensive tackle. Really quick study. A lot of supposedly freak running backs this year. Sony Michel is supposed to test well. Ronald Jones is supposed to test well. Everyone knows about Saquon Barkley. Some people are now talking about this guy from the Hurricanes, Mark Walton. I guess he was injured a lot. And so people haven't talked about him a bunch, but he's supposed to do pretty well, especially in the quickness drills at the combine. I don't know. But if he does, and he's a guy that can catch passes, maybe he's a target for the Vikings because they need a pass catching running back, right? To replace Jerick McKinnon, who just tweeted out basically today, G2G, which, player tweets are always difficult to decipher. That could just as easily be a reference to a brand. But I'm pretty sure he's leaving. Gotta go. There's that. If not him, then either of the running backs from North Carolina State. Nyheim Hines is supposed to just destroy the combine. He might run a 40-yard dash faster than 4.4. And he should have really good explosion and quickness numbers as well. So he's someone to watch. And he could be a guy that really replaces Jerick McKinnon, both in terms of being a freak athlete and in terms of being a pass catching running back that complements someone like Dalvin Cook. But I think Jalen Samuels could also be that guy. I think he won't test as well as Nyheim Hines, but he was kind of the primary weapon out of the backfield for them. And then there's a bunch of receivers to watch. James Washington was an electric deep threat. for Oklahoma State. Christian Kirk is supposed to be this like really dynamic slot guy from Texas A&M, I want to say. And Antonio Callaway is from Florida that some people are pretty excited about. And then there's like a bunch of other players that need to perform well, but those are the guys that I've heard mentioned as potential freaks. Arden Key and Harold Landry at edge rusher 2 are probably guys that are supposed to blow up the combine. I guess we'll see. But that's a quick rundown of the guys that I have read on the internet are really athletic.
Gotta love them internets. Well, now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the combine and a couple of hypotheticals. Kyle Slaby has a couple of good questions here. First question is, if you had equal access to both events but needed to choose one, would you attend the Senior Bowl or the combine?
I guess that one's tough. I like hanging out with my dudes at the Senior Bowl. But I guess the combine, there's just a lot more access, a lot more stuff to be picked up. You'll get less in terms of, because I've been able to, talk to scouts at the Senior Bowl every year as they watch players actually go through, plays and what they watch for. And so I learn a lot from that. But I think it's just a different kind of rich information to get from the combine. So I picked the combine.
One of these, speaking of the combine, I was thinking about the Wonderlic test, and I forget if it was last year or the year before. I was going to put Dusty through the Wonderlic and have a bunch of questions. We were going to end up timing him, and for whatever reason, I didn't end up on the show. One of these days, I really want to put somebody through the damn Wonderlic. We're going to do this. We're going to do it. We'll include the entire thing as an after the show clip thing, but we'll reveal our answers at the end, and then see which one of us is going to get picked by the Jets.
Right.
Next question. If you could sit down with one combine attendee for a 30-minute chat, who would it be?
I kind of don't care.
Be like, well, actually, since we're in since we're going to be in Indianapolis for this, what's the name of the Patriots offensive coordinator again?
Oh, yeah, Josh McDaniels. Yeah, he's not going to be there. Did you hear about this?
I did see that he has decided not to go there. Apparently, he doesn't want to have his food spat in.
Yeah, weird. I don't know. Baker Mayfield would be interesting. Lamar Jackson would be super interesting. I would love to talk to any of the quarterbacks. Josh Rosen, probably we both hate Trump, right? So we'll talk about that. But I'd like to talk to any of the quarterbacks about how they break down film and what they do. Less to evaluate them and more to just learn about what they see. So
you're going to pick the quarterback with the dreamy eyes and just, so that's what you see with those. Oh, no. Mickey Trumper asks, any flyers from this draft that Minnesota might have eyes for, like Behringer last year?
It'll be easier to find out once they go through the actual tests, because I wrote a piece about how the Vikings do have filters at different draft positions. They care a lot about broad jump for offensive linemen. They care about short shuttle for interior offensive linemen. They care about, like I said, the flying 20 for both cornerbacks and receivers. They care about vertical leap for receivers and tight ends. They care about height and to some extent arm length for cornerbacks. And I think that's going to help kind of guide us. One player that I didn't mention among my potentially standouts to the combine is Nathan Shepard from Fort Hays State. The Vikings do need a 3-technique defensive tackle, and he is perfect for that role. And he, before he broke his hand at the Senior Bowl, evidently it was a very minor break, 2 to 3 weeks to repair. So he should be fully ready to go for the combine. But he looked incredibly fluid. He looked super explosive. At the weigh-in, he was rocked up and pretty happy about it. He clapped when he heard his weight, which I thought was hilarious. But he's probably going to test through the roof. And he would be a guy that the Vikings would definitely be interested in. They like those, potentially, super quick, explosive 3 techniques that Sharif Floyd was supposed to be, before he got injured. So yeah, that's a guy that I could see the Vikings targeting as maybe not a mid-round flyer. He could be a second-round guy. But I mentioned Nyheim Hines. It's a really deep running back class. So somebody like Nyheim Hines or even Nick Chubb could fall in middle or late, and they could be these super athletes that end up performing an important role. Or Kalen Ballage from Arizona State. who is just like not that good of a runner as a running back. But he's like 6'2", 220 pounds and a really great pass catcher. So, he could be the guy that they take a flyer on in the 4th, 5th, or 6th round.
I like this question. This question is from Damian Barrett, who says, I finally got around to watching Any Given Sunday, and it got me thinking, which fictional QB from TV or movies would you sign for the Vikings?
Fictional QB.
I like to think that Johnny Utah from Point Break, I really think that Johnny Utah, if he was able to get his stuff together, he would have made a fine quarterback in the right. in the pros after his Rose Bowl performance.
Man, I feel like there's like these like perfect QBs on TV before they're like evil or
you go Varsity Blues. I mean, Jonathan Moxon. I mean, what's not to like about James Vanderbeek?
Well, who's the Friday Night Lights guy that got injured?
Oh, jeez.
The very first QB1, the very first one before the
was that Sarason?
Saracen's the second guy. I'm pretty sure
that's what it was.
The unstructured. He just has to improvise at a great comeback or whatever. But they compared that first guy to Peyton Manning. I'm sure if he'd gone through a whole development program. But I don't know. You know what? I'll Willie Beeman. Let's go with that.
Oh, all right. Next question. Mo Sav asks, should the Vikings take a risk and trade a second-round pick for a guy like Gerald McCoy? The pass rush really declined toward the end of the season. Hopefully he can give us that inside threat, kind of like Fletcher Cox did for the Eagles.
How old is Gerald McCoy? Also, is he available for a second? I don't know. I feel like that's like a not a scenario that you can get. I'm quickly looking him up on Pro Football Focus to see what they thought he did this last year.
He spent a fair amount of it injured.
Yeah. He's been injured. I don't know. He had a pretty good year, I guess. I don't know, man. He's like, oh God, he's as old as me. That's weird. He was born in the same year. All right. So he's 30.
So there's your answer for that.
God damn it. He's old. As old as me.
And I'm just not saying a damn thing, so I'm just gonna.
Right? Yeah, you're that was smart. Yeah. If they can get him for a second round pick, they'll probably have 2-3 years. I think that's probably not a wise long term decision, especially if say Nathan Shepard from Fort Hays State is there. You can get him for potentially like a decade if he's good. But I guess I wouldn't hate it. It just never came to mind as like a. It would be
an odd choice. It wouldn't be something that you'd necessarily protest, but like that, just one of those. Really, that's what you're going with. All right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't protest it, and I'd really enjoy the next 2 seasons. I'd just be really worried about long-term viability of 3 technique.
Yeah. Jack on Twitter asks, what position is Remmers going to play next season, and what is he best suited for?
I think he is best suited for tackle. I think that the question of what's the best position for the team for him to play is a different one, right? Because if you have a mediocre guard and a great tackle, is that better than a great guard and a mediocre tackle? And I think that most people would say that you want a mediocre guard and a great tackle. And I think that that's actually not always true because quarterbacks fear interior pressure the most. It's difficult to help guards. It's easier to help tackles. You have to commit to helping the tackles, which the Vikings historically have not done a ton of. I think he's probably going to play tackle. This is not a bad class for guards, especially at the top. Because you've got obviously Quentin Nelson. Everyone's talking about him. He's not going to fall, but we say he's not going to fall. Sharif Floyd wasn't going to fall either, and then he did. But presuming he doesn't fall, which, like 95, 98% chance he goes in the top 10, or at least doesn't go into the 30s. You've got, Will Hernandez and Isaiah Wynn and Billy Price and There's even a couple of others that people are really into that could show up. I mean, you could end up getting Alex Kappa, who's a tackle from Humboldt State, who could play tackle or guard. Maybe he's better at both positions. There's a lot of good guards. So I wouldn't be surprised if Remmers plays tackle and they find a guard, just because I think it's a little bit more difficult to find a tackle. Now, if like Orlando Brown falls to them and they draft him, I don't hate that. You move Remmers inside to guard. I think that definitely improves the offensive line. But I think generally it is more likely that he plays tackle.
Next question is a multiple choice question. Yay. Raul sends an email and says, let's assume Cousins signs with Minnesota. Who plays his backup? A, Sloter, B, a draftee, C, an internal free agent like Sam, Teddy, or Case, or D, an external free agent. Just a note on C, there's no way that Case ends up backing up somebody in Minnesota, I feel. Like, I just don't see that coming.
Right, you'd have to force him to stay, and the only way to do that is to franchise tag him, and now you've got $55 million wrapped up in your quarterback.
There is no chance of that being a thing.
It's like, the Vikings have a ton of cap room, $57 million. Let's spend it on two guys that play the same position.
Gone.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a decent chance that you'll end up with a backup so if they sign Cousins, I think there's a decent chance you'll find an external backup. I think Teddy wants a genuine competition situation, which would be difficult to find. Maybe he'll find it in Jacksonville, maybe he'll find it in Denver. But I have a feeling that teams that miss on Cousins will either prefer Keenum or they'll just take their chances in the draft unless they're like really SOL in terms of their draft position, which the Bills might be. I don't know. They definitely don't want Tyrod, so that could be a thing. But maybe the Jaguars, even after they committed all of this money to Blake Bortles, might actually. Yeah, the Jets.
The Jets are certainly
spot.
The Jets are certainly an option, seeing as how they they have a quarterback on their staff that they don't want to have play quarterback.
Right. Sorry, were we talking about Christian Hackenberg? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
He has gone 2 years without touching a football in a regular season game.
It's astonishing how committed they are, coach to coach to coach.
Yeah, you won't find a lot of consistency in the coaching decisions of the New York Jets, but that is one of them. They all agree to keep the ball out of his hands.
Right. The Jets would make me sad. I've never been a big fan of the Jets, and I feel like I don't want the mediocrity to infect Teddy. But it's so I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings ended up with Chase Daniel. Somehow, who I think is a free agent, or Josh McCown, who everyone's been talking about. McCown is not only a guy who has proven that he can perform well enough in a Case Keenum type situation and have these unusually huge spikes of success like he did in Chicago, and then later with the Jets. But he's also got a history with DeFilippo, which is nice. I mean, he was DeFilippo's starting quarterback in Cleveland. Chase Daniel obviously has also worked with DeFilippo. And I wouldn't be surprised if they got a backup that was very familiar with the system. So if they sign Cousins, I think they get an external free agent because I think the three free agents in Minnesota want to seek their fortunes elsewhere.
Yeah. John Belk sends an email question, says 2 Teddy scenarios for Arif. Belichick decides Brady only has 1 year left and signs Teddy as the heir apparent, leading Teddy to start for New England in 2019. Does Arif now root for the Patriots in non-Vikings games?
Yeah. that one's not difficult for me.
No. Number 2, Drew Brees decides to retire or signs with another team. Teddy signs with New Orleans and becomes the Drew Brees 2.0 that Arif has always hoped for. Does Arif now root for the Saints in non-Vikings games?
Jesus.
Yeah, wait for scenario 3. Scenario 3 is good.
Oh, great. In scenario 2, that does mean that none of the Saints that were on the 2009 team are on the current iteration of the Saints, because the last one was Drew Brees.
Yes.
So, I mean, I guess Sean Payton is also a person, but
can Sean Payton retire as a part of number 2 as well? Like he decides to go get his face worked on so his lips don't look like that anymore.
Yeah, right. he certainly has enough money to fix the anus mouth.
Yes.
That would be a thing where I'd have to like see it happen, and I'd have to like figure out what I'm thinking when I watch it. But I suspect that I would be happy for success, but I'd just try not to watch Saints games.
Yeah, which it turns out is not all that difficult thanks to our location. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Scenario 3, Minnesota and New Orleans meet in the NFC Championship game. New Orleans wins a last-second perfect deep post from Teddy Bridgewater to Michael Thomas, the pass that has always haunted Arif's dreams. Does Arif root for New Orleans in the Super Bowl?
Oh. Are they playing the Patriots? Because I'll cheer for the Saints against the Patriots in that specific situation.
What if Teddy Bridgewater plays for both the Patriots and New Orleans Saints in the Super Bowl that year?
He calls all-time quarterback?
Yes, exactly. He called dibs. You had to respect dibs.
I cheer for the Patriots in that situation. That's so... God... Man, that's brutal. If Teddy did that to me personally, I'd feel betrayed.
This all just boils down to you personally, doesn't it?
It always does. Sean Payton hates me personally. I know that.
Well, yes. Sean Payton just hates everybody. Sean Payton's just not a nice human being.
Yeah. I mean, Teddy, I spent so much time defending you on the internet, the thing you care about the most. How could you do this? No,
you said too many mean things about his boy, Chad Greenway.
Fair. I would feel vindicated and sad. Yeah, I mean, people feel that, right? That's vindicated and sad is a feeling that people often have. Yeah. I feel like that's been like a theme in politics this year. So
both vindication and sadness.
Yeah. So that's how I feel. Yeah.
Luke Braun asks, would you rather A, draft a quarterback that's in the top 15, but only every 5 years, or draft a QB every year, but in the second, third, and fourth rounds?
Oh, that's interesting. I have a genuine question about whether or not hit rates for third and fourth round quarterbacks we should perceive them as having increased, because obviously Cousins and Wilson and Prescott, and I'm sure there's maybe even one that I'm missing, where third and fourth round quarterbacks are really outperforming their historical hit rate, which is very low. Like it wasn't that different from like a sixth round quarterback, which I guess Tom Brady, but. But yeah, that's a really good question. Would I rather draft a quarterback every year in the third and fourth rounds? I think I would still draft a quarterback in the top 15 every couple of years. I think that's just more likely to produce long-term success. Like assuming that like the means by which you get into the top 15 aren't necessarily because you lost. Like let's say you traded a player and then moved your first round pickup or whatever, right? Yeah. I would. I think I'd prefer that the quarterback, and that means you lose a first round pick every couple of years. But I mean, you probably also gain it by trading away your Jimmy Garoppolos and your Matt Castles and stuff like that.
We're actually just a QB incubator. That's all we are.
That's what New England is. They've been a QB incubator for like years.
For the better part of 2 decades, yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, like, Hoyer and Castle and Mallett and Garoppolo is just picks on picks on picks.
Well, they talk about the coaching tree. We can look at the quarterback tree of Brady, apparently.
Tom Brady's quarterback tree. These are my many sons.
These are my many sons. Jimmy G and his dreamy eyes. Alex Goebel asks, should tampering rules just be eliminated? Is the franchise tag a huge buzzkill for free agency drama?
I'll into the second one first. Yeah, it's such a buzzkill. And it like sucks for players. And it's like it's not that great for teams. I feel like it's just like, now you're on the hook for like $30 million for a guy you don't even care that much about. But it can't go anywhere else, damn it.
No, you're stuck here.
Yeah. The only time I would say the franchise tag is hilariously good is when it's used on a kicker. It's like, it costs you $4 million. That's a surprising amount for a kicker, but also it doesn't really impact you all that much. So You get Steven Gostkowski for another year. Congrats.
I was going to say, like, all of a sudden, like, oh, yeah, well, you know, we were close to having to pay the penalty on it, so we just franchised the kicker.
Right. Yeah.
He was due.
He was due. So, yeah, it absolutely is. It would have been nice to see, you know, players hit the open market and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's kind of boring and sucks. Now, the first question, should tampering rules be eliminated? I feel like they should be loosened significantly. I still think that tampering is a thing that you should worry about during the season. And that should be harshly enforced.
Is it one of those situations where like tampering during the regular season should be eliminated, but as soon as the like confetti flies at the Super Bowl, then all bets are off?
That makes so much sense to me. Yeah. Like
the moment that happens, like reverie hits. And like
phones start ringing.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I'm sure there's a bunch of really good reasons that I'm not considering right now that, you know, I'll have emailed to me or in the comment section or something like that. But yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Like the fact that the NFL basically conceded by having a 3-day tampering window, right? Like, oh, wow, teams agreed to deals on the first second of free agency open. That's so weird. Wow, how did they get to that number so quickly? Like, yeah, okay. Or, I mean, I'm even okay with them getting rid of tampering right before the combine starts. And so you can actually have the combine actually be an open negotiation session for people and their agents.
I feel like if they did that, that would end up boosting the whole like ratings and coverage and all the news that they want to have happen throughout like the off season and make the NFL the biggest sport ever. Be like somebody coughs and it ends up being the first thing they mention on SportsCenter, like that sort of thing. Like, oh yeah, tampering is off. And as you can see here, Oakland and the Jets were sitting here talking about players that are still signed to their contracts. And
the thing that I find, and I feel like you should only, you know, remove it for, you know, players whose deals are set to expire. But like, I feel like one sort of interesting thing would be if, you know, what Frank Gore did the Eagles happened more often in the NFL, where they agree to terms and then right before they're set to sign, they're like, yeah, I'm getting a weird feeling about this. No, I'm going to Indianapolis. So everyone was like, oh, wow, Frank Gore, the Eagles, that's crazy. They've got so many running backs there now. And he's like, yeah, they got so many running backs there. I don't know.
Be like, no, what I really need to do, I need to spend more time in Indianapolis, which is not a sentence that a lot of people have. You know, that's just that's not
Josh
a thought.
McDaniels agrees.
Exactly. Yes. That's just not a thought process that a lot of people go through.
Right. So I'd get rid of tampering during the combine all the way up to the actual, you know, walk up to free agency. It would be hilarious for players to agree to terms with teams and then get worn down during essentially the college recruiting process. You can like flip a free agent. Like, yeah, you might get, you know, $20 million over there. We'll get you $21 million and a gold Mercedes. Like, oh, okay.
You're like, really? That's where we're at?
I mean, if you could flip free agents like you can flip college recruits, how crazy would Twitter be? Yeah, let's do it. Next question.
Next question is actually the final two questions we have. Ian on Twitter asks, what's the plan if they do intend to go after Cousins with and Teddy and Case are gone? Obviously, Don from Ohio's answer is going to be Sloter.
Right. I think it's probably McCown. You can get him for $6 million, right? So probably $6 million. So yeah, that's $36 million wrapped up in quarterbacks and only $20 million or so. 25, I think, after you get, or 26 after you get Rashee Floyd. But still, you know, it's depending on the nature of his grievance and whether or not that goes through. I wrote an article about that at Zone Coverage that he may end up incurring like another $3 million in dead cap liability, even if the Vikings do cut him, because of the way that they treated it as a non-football injury when he was getting in a surgery for an injury he received because of football. Kind of complicated, whatever. Either way, they'll have, you know, if they sign both McCown and Cousins to an enormous amount of money, they'll have $20 to $25 million left in cap space, which creates a crunch for 2019. But it's still interesting nonetheless. I wouldn't be surprised if it was McCown. I also wouldn't be surprised if they got a mid-round quarterback. It could be, Logan Woodside or Kyle Auletto or Mike White, or it could be Mason Rudolph or Luke Falk. Those two I'd be less interested in, but whatever. I think that it's going to be kind of one of those two options. With instead of McCown, it could be Chase Daniel too as well.
What if we ended up in a situation where we were able to sign AJ McCarron as a backup? Would that be something that would interest you?
Yeah, actually it would. A lot of people rag on him, but I do think that he's a top tier backup. Maybe better than a couple of starters in the NFL. The top backups usually are. But that wouldn't bother me, but I just feel like he's going to be expensive.
Entirely possible. Final question is also from Ian, who asks, how many flips for a 10-ounce sirloin is too many for medium rare on a grill?
I think people over care about flipping. Testing has shown that flipping your steaks often. This is true. I'm serious.
Alton Brown says.
Yeah, well, this one's Serious Eats. A blog inspired by Alton Brown. Mm-hmm. But constant flipping actually more evenly cooks your meat and is less likely, not more likely, but less likely to create a bad temperature gradient inside your steak. So there's really not too many flips, although you should have some contact with the grill. I would say anything faster than every 30 seconds is just way too much. Come on.
Oh, God, yeah. I'm a 4-minute man when it comes to flipping steaks on the grill. So usually about 4.5 minutes or so, maybe 3, depending if I have it a little too hot. But I tend to go 4, and that would typically mean that I flip it 3 times.
Yeah, fair enough. What I usually do is I just did this whole spiel about how flipping often is good. So I don't, because I usually let my steaks come up to temperature on the cool side of the grill. Like I think 120 to 123 to 125 degrees. And then I've got a super hot side of the grill that I just sear them on. And so I really do only have 30 seconds on each side. And then they come out like perfect medium rare in the middle without too much of a temperature gradient. So that's usually what I do. That's because I can create, heat zones on my grill because it's big enough. So if the grill's not big enough, then yeah, every 4 minutes makes sense. I think every 2 minutes makes sense too.
So it makes total sense to be flipping it as much as you want. I don't do it though, because that's just not how I was raised in my house.
Science.
The only way that I can
do in this house.
Yeah, the only way I flip my steaks is through a hole in the sheet. Like it's. I can celebrate Christmas through this thing. It's great.
If I'm cooking a steak traditionally where I don't have different heat zones on the grill, yeah, I'll flip it probably every 2 minutes. But I don't. If I've got a big enough grill, I don't have to do that.
Mm-hmm. So let's wrap things up. Do you have anything to plug for us now that this is the end of this episode?
Yeah, so I mentioned the combine filters that the Vikings seemingly use. Most of them are not hard filters, but they have a strong preference for tight ends who have a vertical leap of at least 33 inches. In the past, they've gone for tight ends that have run 4.740s or faster. As an example, right? They do not care about short shuttle times for cornerbacks, but they do very strongly care about 40 times for cornerbacks, that sort of thing. So I've got it broken down for each position. There's this. So I also noted there's this weird thing where they have acquired a bunch of quarterbacks with really good broad jumps. I'm pretty sure that's a coincidence, but I did note that in the article. I was like, this probably doesn't matter, but did you know?
No, that's actually what Rick Spielman just uses to decide everything.
Right, it's just like, do you jump far enough? All right, you can throw a ball. But yeah,
do you jump far enough? You can probably park my car at this restaurant.
But yeah, so that's up its own coverage. I'm gonna have continuing coverage about athlete or athleticism at the combine, combine that with production analytics, that's going to go through the draft. But because between the combine and the actual NFL draft, we've got a chunk in the middle that's free agency. I'm also going to be doing a piece on underrated free agents, or not even underrated, actually. Some of them are just genuinely not good. Under the radar free agents that you may not be considering that the Vikings probably are, at least thinking about.
Oh, that'll be very cool. So that is going to be it for this episode. Again, if you'd like to support us, if you've enjoyed this episode and would like to help keep us ad-free, you can do so at NorseCodePodcast.com. We've got a couple of different links to things like Patreon.com/NorseCode and PayPal.me/NorseCode for donations to keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay. Help keep the lights on, stuff like that. So for Arif, my name is James. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode, and continue to demand excellence. Demand Norse Code. And we'll see you soon.
Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, or wherever else fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, who can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. Our intrepid producer and occasional co-host James Pogachnik can be found on Twitter at Big Mono, or curating the official Norse Code Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. I'm your host with a firm grasp of the obvious, Dusty O'Connell, and my name is my handle on Twitter. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, your one-time donation can be made at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Please visit our website, NorseCodePodcast.com, where you'll find links to our Facebook and YouTube pages, along with the episode archive and some other good stuff. And any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be emailed to NorseCodePodcast@gmail.com. And on behalf of the entire Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.